Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Adam Dorsay, a psychologist in Silicon Valley and the host of SuperPsyched, a podcast dedicated to supercharging your life. Each episode contains fun, high-quality interviews with experts looking at psychology from all angles. SuperPsyched is your tool to get more of what you want in your life and less of what you don't. I think it's safe to guess we've all heard the idea, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Nietzsche wrote it, Kelly Clarkson sang it. It's a pithy, memorable phrase. But with due respect to Nietzsche and Clarkson, it's not necessarily true. I believe that the truth is less catchy, and I'd propose this instead. What doesn't kill you might make you stronger, but it might make you weaker. A major difference between these outcomes lies in coping and the meaning we create after the loss. Do we cope by isolating, using substances, acting out on our loved ones, or other destructive behaviors? Or do we employ healthier techniques to move us through pain, like engaging in art, further developing good habits, or talking about our pain with a trusted loved one and/or a therapist? On this episode, I speak with my friend and colleague, Dr. Hayward. Shen is a psychologist in private practice in Redwood City, California. She earned her bachelor's degree at Stanford and a doctorate in experimental psychology with an award-winning dissertation at Harvard. She achieved these and many other jaw-dropping feats after a life-altering accident just before her 17th birthday that left her without use of her legs. Shen shares candidly about her story as well as tips based on crucial research, some of which she conducted on the topic of resilience and post-traumatic growth. So listen in as Shen speaks in her engaging, intellectually stimulating, and relatable manner that has made this one of my all-time favorite interviews. Dr. Shen Hayward, welcome to SuperPsyched.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
I am chomping at the bit. You are not just one of my favorite colleagues, you're just one of my favorite people.
Oh, Adam, it's so mutual.
All right, Shen, let's get into it.
Okay, let's do this.
Let's just start off with your personal story. When you were just shy of 17, something happened, but let's talk a little bit about before that, afterwards, and then what would lead you into studying at the highest levels human resilience.
Right. Thank you. That's such a great question. I had sort of an alternative upbringing. I grew up on a little tiny kind of hippie island off the coast of Washington State with amazing parents who decided to homestead, and they dropped out of their third year of paleoanthropology study at Berkeley and decided to homestead. So they bought 20 acres. They had about 33 cents left. They took the forested land, had a friend chop down some of the trees and turn them into boards. They used the boards to build their own house. They didn't know how. They just read books on how to build a house. And they constructed this dwelling for us. And so that was how I grew up. But they didn't know how to do electricity or running water or plumbing. So we had an outhouse. We had no running water, no electricity. And that was how I grew up. And it was amazing. And then when I was 16, I was given a scholarship to compete for a private college prep academy in Hawaii called Hawaii Prep, and for their track and cross country teams. And distance running, I was really into sports. I did volleyball, basketball, track, and cross country, but distance running was sort of my forte. And so I went over there my junior year to compete for their two teams. And at the end of that junior year, had an amazing time going to high school in Hawaii. But at the end of the year, my best friend and I, who was also on the track team, wanted to go to the beach to celebrate having won the state track meet. And the driver of our car, who was another girl from our dorm, because we were in boarding school, was driving a little recklessly, as many 17-year-olds do. And she started going around 90 miles an hour down a winding mountain road because our high school was up in the hills, and passing 3 cars in a no passing zone. And the third car, unfortunately, turned left pretty sharply. And so we jackknifed and then bounced off and hit a lava wall. And I was thrown out of the car. And I landed on my head on the pavement. So I was in a coma for about 10 days. And the doctors called my parents back in Washington State, where they were living, and told them if they wanted to see their daughter alive, they needed to fly out within 24 hours. And fortunately, they were wrong. And I did wake up. And unlike the expectations, I didn't lose cognitive ability. They had predicted that I wouldn't be able to breathe on my own and hold conversations and so forth. And what's amazing about that story or that experience that ties into the topic of resilience, which we were talking about a little bit before this interview, was that what made it easier for my family was that 6 years earlier, they had gotten the same phone call about my older brother, whose name was Rishi, and he was killed in a tractor accident. And so he was also in an accident like me, but he didn't survive. So when it came to my accident, their attitude was like, you're alive. Paralysis, what? Paralysis. You're alive. And that's what we're going to focus on. And being surrounded by that sort of embrace changed everything for me. And it really shaped my trajectory. My rehabilitation became my next sport. And I went to an outpatient rehab place in Southern California, learned to walk again in braces, which I don't do anymore because it's not very practical. But I was able to go back to my second semester of senior year and graduate with my class and go to prom and all those things, walking in my braces. And after that, I took a year off to do more rehabilitation. But I also flew around the world trying to meet every guru and healer and acupuncturist and energy worker who knew anything about walking again. And it was an amazing year. I swam with dolphins in Key Largo, who pushed their little noses into my feet, trying to make me move, and met these amazing monks. And just, it was an incredible year. And then I started at Stanford in the fall. And even from the early days, I always knew that I wanted to study psychology, but my experience really shaped the trajectory of my work because my experience was so different than everything I found in the literature. The literature on spinal cord injury all focused on things like clinical depression, suicidality, substance abuse, and none of the growth and the amazing things that you can gain from really hard experiences. And so I started in the library, pouring into all the journals and looking for something that matched my experience. And it was through that process that I came upon research on happiness and also research on post-traumatic growth and resilience. And that shaped my master's, my bachelor's, master's, and then research at Stanford. And after about 5 years, I applied to go back to school and I went to Harvard for my PhD. And all of my research focused on those constructs: happiness, resilience, and post-traumatic growth.
Just taking that in. And before we get into post-traumatic growth and happiness, let's talk about the grief versus positivity continuum, so to speak. I'm not sure if that's actually a term, but I would imagine you needed to grieve before, on some level. It was like a blessing in disguise that your family had already faced the nadir with Rishi of losing him. And it's like by basis of comparison, wait, she's alive. This is amazing. And yet you had also lost function. You'd been a volleyball player and a runner and such a supreme athlete. And this was, to call it a curveball would be the ultimate euphemism. This was a major, major change in your life that required attending to some of the feelings. So I'm just wondering, and I know we all grieve differently, but I'm just wondering if you could share a little bit about your own grieving process and how it might have served you seemingly, ostensibly, paradoxically into studying post-traumatic growth and happiness.
Interestingly, well, a lot of people know about George Bonanno's research on resilience and how there's these different, maybe 4 different trajectories post-trauma. And one of them is the recovery, where you develop symptoms at first, and then your symptoms wane, and that's recovery. And then there's resilience, where he posits it's just sort of like you don't ever really get affected. And then there's delayed recovery, where your symptoms are high and then later you recover. And then there's one that looks like you're pretty good, and then later in life it goes up.
Later in life, for those of you who can't see, because you can't, there's a massive descent.
Yes. And thank you. And I would have to say that of those, my grieving process was most like the delayed one, in that in the beginning, I was so focused on this goal of walking again and learning everything I could about everything that might be relevant to my injury and physiology, and finding the perfect healer and traveling to who knows where in order to meet somebody who was going to save me. And it was very exciting, and it was active coping, right? So I did a lot, I learned a lot, I kept very busy. And it wasn't until much, much later, I think when I was at Harvard, actually, I got an email from the young woman who had been driving in my accident and who had crashed into the other car and was responsible for my injury, technically responsible for my injury. And she said something in her email, I think it opened with, "I'm sorry I ruined your life." And then, how she'd been feeling and so forth. And then at the end, of course, "But if you'd like, we can be Facebook friends." And
I'm having so many problems with everything in this communication. The beginning of "I'm sorry I ruined your life," all the way to "we can become Facebook friends." My brain feels like it's about to explode, but okay, keep going.
Right. Yeah, I had a lot of problems too. And that was the first kind of clue for me that maybe I wasn't as well adapted and over it as I had imagined, because I didn't want to respond to her. And it took me about 3 weeks before I could authentically send her a response to how I was doing. And at first I told her, "You didn't ruin my life. My life is wonderful. Thank you." And then I told her how long it takes me to get dressed in the morning, which is very long, how long it takes me to shower, how hard it was living on the East Coast where there are stairs into every building, and so forth. And then I ended with, "But if you want, we can be Facebook friends."
Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God.
Yeah. Interestingly, we became Facebook friends, but then we started talking on the phone every day for hours. And then she flew out for my dissertation defense, and we became very close for a while, and, sort of talked through both of our processes and so forth. But the interesting part, I think, is that I wasn't really aware that there was unprocessed material still inside of myself, because I think I went so fast in the beginning and was so determined to be so positive and tackle this challenge that I think I skipped over some of the grieving process, which I really do believe is necessary for any loss.
Brilliantly articulated. And what often happens when you and I talk, Shen, and listener, Shen and I love talking with you. I just have so much fun when I'm with you. I feel sometimes like if you're a pitcher, you're throwing like 5 balls my way, and I'm wondering which one to swing at.
Right.
The first thing I just need to attend to is, I'm going to call it courageous belly flops. She reached out to you. She didn't have to. And she said something that was utterly tone deaf and like, "I'm sorry I ruined your life," which I'm guessing is better than not reaching out. So I don't want to just clown on like that, but she made it about her in so many ways. And one of the things that you're saying, I'm reading in the parentheses, is it would have been so much different. And one of the things that we also get tongue-tied around so many phenomena, and that's a whole other episode unto itself. if we were to talk about life in a chair and how people can become tongue-tied just around that alone. But one of the things that I'm getting from your response to her is what I've actually heard from veterans from the military. Don't just say thank you for my service. Ask me what it was like if you want to know.
Yes.
If you have the time, that would feel really good. And so here you were saying, this is what my life is like. And there's something so profound to me as the listener of this anecdote, this moment of you saying, this is what my life is like now. Can we talk about the richness of that for a second before we get into the other stuff about the grief unto itself, the delayed grief?
I think that I learned to live as a yes and since my accident. It wasn't, so in my response to her, as an example, it wasn't, you ruined my life, but I'm doing okay. Or it wasn't, my life is fine, but all these things suck. It was, this was a trauma, a challenge, and I'm doing wonderfully. Well, thank you. It was being able to hold the cognitive complexity of those two things at once, right? Of the dialectic between you can have an amazingly rich and wonderful life imbued with meaning and friends and everything, and it can be pretty damn hard at the same time.
So from that, I'm wondering, what would it have been like with not much thought, crafting a note of, my goodness, you've been on my mind. I am so sorry for having behaved so recklessly, and I'm wanting to know how you're doing. Please tell me about your life. I don't know what that would have been like to have received.
Completely different, right? Because what's absent is all of the assumptions. And so many people with disabilities say that it's not the disability itself that makes life hard. It's everybody else's assumptions, meaning non-disabled folks' assumptions about quality of life, about how hard, how awful, how bad it must be to live like us, like people with disabilities. And that's what makes the experience hard and painful. And so in the framing that you presented, I think it would have been very healing to have heard, I have no idea what your life is like, and I would love to know.
Yeah, that's really powerful. I'm really glad that you brought that in, because I think it's probably better to make a tone deaf belly flop and an attempt to reach out.
Absolutely.
What I would love to see more of are, I don't know how to say this any other way, but an openness, a curiosity, a willingness to try to bridge. And I know intent and impact are often at odds.
Right.
But what you were able to do, and one of the things that makes you such a good healer in general, is your capacity for alchemy. You're able to take something very leaden and make it into gold. And here was, this lead balloon that came your way, and somehow you were able to transmit something back that may have contributed to both of your healing, but more importantly, yours.
Right.
Am I reading that correctly?
Absolutely. And I think that could be the secret to life, right? That people say when you get lemons, make lemonade. But life will always have pain in it. That's just part of the deal. And so the trick is to find the beauty in the pain always. And it's always worth the effort, because it's always there. No matter how hard, how bad or counter to what we expected to live, there's always beauty to be found.
So true. I remember, I'm not doing an apples to apples comparison, and I won't be, because I can't do an apples to apples comparison for anything you're describing. But during COVID, I remember saying to people, this is not the opportunity we want, but this is the opportunity we have. How do we make this good?
Yes.
And I remember one of my favorite quotes comes from Winston Churchill, who arguably saved the world, as far as I'm concerned, in the 20th century. But he said, never squander a good crisis. I believe I'm saying it correctly. I think I may be paraphrasing, but something to that effect. I think it was those words.
I agree. And I think that another way to put it, so to ground it in the psychological literature on happiness, what you're describing is, or trauma gives us the opportunity to take a step off of the hedonic treadmill, which is that idea that all through our lives, we're running and running and running towards a better life, to happiness that exists somewhere else in front of us, but we never get anywhere. And these traumas, these crises, give us a moment where we have choice. We can get back on the treadmill and keep running and running and running as we did before, or we can step off, take a moment, look around, reevaluate, and live life a little differently.
And I'm laughing because you use the term hedonic treadmill as if all my listeners will know what that means. And you and I are both positive psychology geeks.
Right,
so let's just unpack the hedonic treadmill for a second, please. What is what is the hedonic treadmill, which is something that I cited in my dissertation as well?
That's amazing. So did I. Right. So the hedonic treadmill is just the idea that we, like I described, we're always running and running and running towards things that you can picture someone on a treadmill. They're running really fast and really hard, but they're not actually going anywhere. They're not getting closer to happiness, towards a better life.
It's like eating Skittle after Skittle and looking for the next delicious, fun thing.
Right, exactly. And living life that way, I would say, is more of the status quo. We do that. We're trained to do that, or socialized to do that.
Totally. And when we're reinforced, except it gets us nowhere.
It gets us nowhere. That's the main point, right? And so that's what makes these traumas, these crises, so beautiful, is that they're opportunities to take a step off that way of living and do it a little differently and hopefully a little better.
So you're speaking indirectly about something I know that you and I care about deeply, and that is meaning and finding meaning.
Yeah.
And what really gives me excitement, I remember talking to David Kessler, who co-wrote The 5 Stages of Grief. And the 6th stage, finding meaning after the loss. And I was so like, oh my God, that's the greatest discovery ever. And it sounds like, as you had this delayed grief, and by the way, just as an aside, just last night, I was watching a show and it showed a loss that I hadn't attended to because I was so busy. And I started crying. I had a micro delayed onset of grief because I kind of compartmentalized it and packaged it. And it was just waiting for the right moment to just kind of, and I don't cry very often. I'd like to. I'd like to cry more, have fewer stop gaps around that. I seem to just kind of come close sometimes, but last night I definitely did. And just needed to cite the strangeness of that experience, even on the micro level, including on the macro, which you're describing. But before we go out there and kick ass and take names, which you've done on ridiculous levels, let's get into it. So you have an award-winning dissertation from this tiny, rather unknown school called Harvard. And so really had to pass muster at the highest levels. And so here I am getting to talk with you about it. What do people need to know about post-traumatic growth and resilience? What are some of, just before we get really into it, what are some basic truths, or at least as we know it now, according to the research, until they're disproven at some point?
Yes, exactly. Until somebody else does their dissertation and throws it all away. What I did for my research was I took a study that has been called the world's most famous study on happiness. It's the one by Brickman, Coates, and Janoff Bullman about lottery winners and paralyzed people. And it was done in 1978. It was Ronnie Janoff Bullman's master's thesis. And I took that study and I replicated it because it's also thought of to be the most misunderstood study of happiness in the literature, because the way it's often presented and the way people kept talking about it after my injury was, don't worry, you'll be as happy as a lottery winner. Because a misreading of the study is that after they took a group of people who had won a fairly low amount in the lottery. And then they took a group of controls, and then they took a group of paralyzed folks.
Newly paralyzed, right?
Newly paralyzed. That was the key thing. Yeah. Thank you. All within a year.
I remember citing it in my dissertation, and you poked me. Sorry, go ahead, keep going.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. So paralyzed within about a year post-injury. And the way it's presented in the world and in class and in textbooks is that there was hardly any difference between any of the groups. So no matter if you win the lottery, no matter if you get paralyzed, you will always be as happy as you were because of this set point theory of happiness and hedonic adaptation, which is where we adapt to whatever happens to us, good or bad. But if you actually read the study really closely, you find that that's not the case. The paralyzed group was more than a standard deviation less happy than either group. They were pretty darn unhappy. As a matter of fact, there's one line in the paper that I think leads to the broad misunderstanding, which was paralyzed participants were less miserable than expected by the researchers. And from that line grew this misunderstanding. So I wanted to replicate the study, fix some of the methodological weaknesses, and make it so that, or do something experimentally so that everybody was equally happy. And what I did to adjust that, so I found 50 people who had won over $1 million in the lottery. Some had won like 76 million, some had won 1 million. So a significant amount of money, more significant than the original study. I had my control group and I had my group of people who were paralyzed in accidents, but I only recruited people who were at least 1 or 2 decades post-event. So the lottery winners, I believe, averaged about 15 years post-winning, and the paralyzed folks averaged about 20 years post-accident. And with that elongation of time, there actually was time for hedonic adaptation to take place, and everybody was equally happy. So that was the most exciting finding from my research. And from that, I also did about 5 other studies.
So everybody was equally happy in your study? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If you gave them more time.
Unpack that further. What is within,
right.
What do you think?
I think that hedonic adaptation, right? The concept that given enough time, we all roughly go back to our set point, meaning all of us have the supposed set point, which is our average level of happiness, right? And most people at most times are slightly above average if you ask them to subjectively rate their happiness. And what the research shows is that no matter what happens to you, it can be really good, like winning a lottery, or really hard, like becoming paralyzed and using a wheelchair. Regardless, in time, you will close that gap and go back to your original set point. So basically, humans can adapt to everything.
And revert.
And right. And what's interesting is that there's actually only, I think in all the studies that I know of, there's only 5 things in life where that has not been true. And they've studied divorce, disability, death, cancer, every other chronic illness, just about everything. And there's only these like 5 things remaining. And they are things like long commutes and uncontrollable loud noise, a lack of control, and interpersonal conflict, I believe, are the 4 where until those things cease, our happiness does drop significantly until they're taken away. So we don't naturally go back to our higher set point. And interestingly, the other one is one where we do get sustainably higher and we don't drop back down. And it is a form of cosmetic surgery.
Let's talk about that for just a second. So we get the cosmetic surgery. I've taken great interest in this. Mm-hmm. People, by the way, there have been studies that indicate that people spend money that they do not have because we care so much about how we present in this world, right, that we will spend just about anything, including money we don't have, on things that will not make us happy long term. At least that's my understanding. Is that correct?
Well, my understanding of literature is that when it comes to breast augmentation and breast reduction, people do remain reliably happier than they were
with those two interventions.
With those two. And I think that those are the two that were studied. I'm not sure they're the only two where this is true. But there was a fairly small study done on cosmetic surgery of that type. And they found that people were sustainably higher. Women were sustainably higher post-surgery. And what the authors attributed it to was what society does about women's bodies and the amount of shame that can exist for a woman who has a non-normative, or meaning their body doesn't match the societal ideal, that women carry this tremendous amount of shame. And by relieving that shame, people get sustainably happier. That was what the authors made.
That is fantastic to know.
Yeah.
And how about in other cosmetic interventions?
I don't know. I don't know.
I'd love to know. Damn,
I know, right?
I've been dying to have a cosmetic surgeon on my podcast at some point. All right. Let's go back to something that you said that might cause a listener to say, well, if I just revert to my genetic set point or my set point, what's the point of exerting effort? What are things within our effort that we can do now? Obviously, barring we could find ways to lessen the commute, perhaps. That's one. But what are the things that are within our control?
That's a whole other body of literature that's equally fascinating, not about adaptation, but about sustainable happiness or interventions. And in between my time at Stanford and Harvard, I worked for about 2 years with Dr. Martin Seligman at Penn's Positive Psychology Center. He's the researcher who was famous for learned helplessness. And then in the early or late 90s, he started the positive psychology movement, if you will, when people started doing research on the things that are right about us instead of just what is wrong. And some of his lab was focused on deriving these interventions to make people happier. And another researcher who listeners can look up is Sonia Lubomirsky, who I believe is in Riverside.
That's right. I love her.
Yeah. Oh, she's great. And she has also studied that. And they have found that some actions that we take, for example, keeping a gratitude diary or gratitude journal, can boost our happiness. Also, an exercise that's just called 3 Good Things, where at the end of every day, we jot down 3 good things that happened during the day and why they happened. And so there are some things like that that can boost our happiness. It's not a lot. I wish there were more, but they are out there. So there is a chunk of our happiness that we can control, which is exciting.
Love that. And one of the things I used to do fairly often was use Ed Diener's Satisfaction with Life scale, which you can get for free. It's 7, very easy, just to find you a baseline of how satisfied am I with life, and then do those 3 interventions that you just mentioned.
Yeah.
And then do after 2 weeks.
Right. Well, that's a great idea.
Really interesting find. First of all, they tend to go up. It's simple, but very few people are willing to actually do the simple things, as there's so much resistance around doing them. And I just, I know I do that too, particularly around stretching and things like that.
Exercise, that is definitely one of, what do they call it? Nature's antidepressant. Exercise is something that can reliably boost our mood.
Yeah.
And yet so many people don't do it.
So many people don't. Yeah. And then there's, of course, biophilia, being around nature and and sunlight. But I love, if I may share your nickname, which is Shenshine, because you were probably, on some level, born with a genetically high set point for happiness. I refer to it as being born on the happier side of the bed, just to kind of conflate 2 ideas of, I woke up on the wrong side of the bed. And
I love that.
But you were born on the happier side of the bed. So it's really fortunate too, because one could do a deep dive, and understandably, into the depression, post-paralysis, the substance abuse. These are all valid things to study. Yeah. But given your orientation and your story, your narrative, you dove in to post-traumatic growth, happiness, and finding meaning after the loss.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. I probably was born with a cheerful disposition and very optimistic. My mother is the world's greatest optimist. She wins. And I was fortunate to benefit from that. And there is some literature on things that not little things like a commute or plastic surgery, but things like life events, significant life events. The research is by Richard Lucas that do affect us reliably or drop our set point. One of them from his research, interestingly, he studied, which was a challenge to my research, he studied disability as a thing that could happen to you midlife, but it would reliably reduce your happiness. That was what his findings were. Also, another one was unemployment, that even years past unemployment, people were still reliably less happy. However, in my opinion, the two were conflated because the definition of disability that he used in the sample was people that could not work because they had a disability. So I think, yeah, if you took all of the people with disabilities out there who don't work, of course they're going to be less happy, right? Because work gives us so much meaning and social connection and a reason to get out of bed in the morning. And I think the research holds that about a third of people with spinal cord injuries or with disabilities do look quite depressed. So it's higher than in a non-disabled population, but it's not the majority. The vast majority of people with disabilities look pretty happy, and they look as happy as non-disabled folks. Some people think they're happier. However, so I think that the reason that in the research, some people have found that it does have a significant deleterious effect to our well-being is because of that conflation with unemployment. So it's a definitional problem.
Such an important distinction, such an important wheat and chaff problem, because cause and effect are so often neglected in research, paradoxically. Yeah. Like, this is what we should be looking at. And the fact is, it's not necessarily the chair that puts the crown on. It's the not being employed. And I interviewed Gil Wench, who started a startup in Israel. He said, I noticed a profound gap in society around the unemployed people who with disabilities who need to be employed. Yes. And we're neglecting a massive segment of the workforce by not employing people with various disabilities who could otherwise be employed. And of course,
completely agree.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's interesting because it's sort of counter my political views, because I do believe that we should take care of our society's most vulnerable folks, and there should be a social safety net and so forth. However, I also believe that everybody with any disability can work in some way. And the reason I believe that is I've been fortunate to meet so many people with such varied and significant disabilities. One of my friends who I met in my earliest days at rehabilitation in Southern California, he had a very high cervical injury. So that resulted in quadriplegia, or what's today called tetraplegia. And so he had no movement. He could breathe on his own, but that was it. And he worked for the government for 14, 15 years, something to do with computers. And he used eye tracking, and he could get around by sipping and puffing on a straw that powered his wheelchair. And so he had so little function, as we typically think about function, but he could do everything when it came to work. And I think that because of that, he led a more fulfilling, populated, meaningful life.
I couldn't agree more. People love to kick Sigmund Freud in the nuts, but the fact is he was right about so many things, and he created an entire lexicon. But one of the things he really got right, from my vantage point, is love and work are the two biggest components of life. If we can crush it in those two areas, like we've got a big part of the Pareto's 80-20. So,
I would add play.
Hell yes. Love, work, and play.
Yes.
Okay, let's get into play and resilience. Let's talk about.
Well, I think the two can be connected. Having play in our lives, something that we do just for the sake of doing it, meaning it's intrinsically motivated, not extrinsically motivated, can add so much to our sense of meaning. And having a sense of meaning or a sense of purpose in our lives. I did 3 primary studies for my dissertation, and one of them took head-to-head high meaning versus high money amongst my participants and looked at, correlated them with happiness. And for happiness, I use every happiness measure that's ever been invented, including the one, Adam, that you were speaking about, the subjective well-being scale. So no matter how I measured it, the most robust finding was that the people who had high meaning were much happier than the people who had high income. And in my experience, I think that has been true for me, that simply having a sense that what I do matters means everything to me. And Adam, I was telling you earlier about just having my 25th Stanford reunion a couple weekends ago. And the one thing that I kept noticing was so many people had gone and just made a ton of money. We're working in the same job, they had IPOs in their startups, that sort of thing. And then there were people who had taken the meaning path, right? They did nonprofit work or they worked for social services, that sort of thing. And in my mind, sort of kept a mental checklist of who seemed happier or who had a more fulfilling experience. And of course, because I'm very biased about this, I would always choose to be in the meaning bucket if I could. because I think it's precious and something that's worth working for. Oh, and I just read a book that I found really compelling. It was called The Purpose Code by Dr. Jordan Grumet, I think. And he is a palliative care doctor, works with end of life folks. And so it's a great book. His definition of purpose, he divides it into two sections. One is little p purpose and one is big P purpose. Big P purpose is what you and I were previously talking about, like meaning in life, having a calling. That's what we typically think of as purpose. But for that type, he said that there's a lot of what's called purpose anxiety, people who are so worried because they haven't found their purpose in life, their one true calling. So he is a proponent of little p purpose, which are the little things we can do in life that bring us joy, that are meaningful, like art or talking to other people or, helping others, volunteering. Those are our little p purpose activities, and we have complete control over whether we engage in those or not. So it makes purpose much more accessible.
I love that so much.
Yeah, I did too.
And you've just completely rocked my entire lexicon of love and work. Now it's love, work, and play.
Awesome.
And I'm realizing, Shen, that I experience all three with you. You're my friend, so there's love. There is work because you and I share a profession, and I always get smarter, and I hope you get a little smarter as
Absolutely.
well.
Absolutely.
And there's so much play.
Yes.
You and I are laughing our asses off, generally speaking, throughout our conversations.
Sure.
And when you think about the best teachers you've ever had, they didn't just teach the subject matter. They probably made it playful. They probably, and there seems to be such a correlation between memory and humor, or learning and humor and levity. Can we just talk about how levity has also, what you've seen in the research and how it's also been useful in your life?
Well, I think the power of humor can't be underestimated. I remember when I was first injured, when I was 16, I was lying in bed in the hospital for 4 months. That was back when health insurance covered 4 months of care.
Oh,
it doesn't so much anymore. But I was there because I had to wake up from the coma, and then I had to have my neuropsych testing, and then I had to, most of the bones or many of the bones on the right side of my body were broken. So I was casted and I had to heal. And then I had to learn to use a wheelchair, which was actually very hard in the very beginning because I wasn't strong. So it was a very long process. And I was in the hospital, as I said, for 4 months. And then I went to 8 months or 4 more months of outpatient rehab in Southern California. And I remember the moments of levity that were brought to me by family and friends from that time. I remember once my friend who was also in the accident with me, who was my best friend, who had the front passenger seat, Tara, she came to my hospital room in Seattle and she just lay on the hospital bed next to me and was joking and treating everything with levity and, acting like nothing had really happened. And it was so tremendously healing.
Wow. I'm just thinking about the moments that people have done that for me in my darkest moments, and they've been such a big deal.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
so even in a moment as grave as that,
Right.
It's just like, here you are with your friend who's saying, I'm tongue-tied as I articulate just how crucial this is.
Right. How profoundly impactful just those little moments of showing your loved one that we got this. We're a team and I'm going to be with you.
Well, I've got 1,012 things. As I was saying in the green room, I almost feel like I wish I could do what Bill Moyers did with Joseph Campbell, and that is have a series of interviews with you, because I just could speak with you forever. And thankfully offline, we get to do that. By the way, before I get to my truly final question for now, is there anything I should have asked but haven't yet asked?
I remember one thing that I was thinking about this morning, because I did listen to your last podcast where you were talking about favorite quotes.
Oh, yes.
Yes. And I loved that. And so it sparked this contemplation of what are my favorite quotes. And one of them, I think that's very apropos to what we're discussing about post-traumatic growth and resilience, is by Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist teacher, late Buddhist teacher. And he said, very simply, no mud, no lotus. Isn't that beautiful?
Love that so much.
Yes, I have it on a little medallion from his plum village in France. It captures post-traumatic growth. It captures beauty being found in difficult times, that in many ways, and I actually argued this with some of my Harvard, or one of my Harvard professors, I do think that it can be necessary to struggle in order to experience some levels of beauty and some levels of joy.
I mean, is that fair? Am I allowed to?
Yes, absolutely.
Like that is just so what?
I feel very supported. Thank you. Yes, but I think it is absolutely necessary to experience low lows in order to be able to access the highest highs, because it stretches out your spectrum of emotional experience in a way that, as far as I've experienced, nothing else can.
For sure. And by the way, I don't want to throw shade on anybody who's working with people who've been more traumatized than themselves, and doesn't mean that we can't empathize, but to say that we know what it's like without having actually experienced it, I need to disabuse anyone of that notion. I can certainly work with someone whose sexual orientation is different from my own and still dial in, but I can't say I know exactly what it's like.
Right. And that was his argument.
It must be terrifying when you get to Oz and you look behind the curtain and see that the wizard is, just a dude. And
just a dude. And it was interesting because that experience actually was a good example of beautiful things that come from ugly experiences. Because we had that disconnect, I was allowed to look far and wide for anybody in the Harvard community, or actually greater Boston area, who I wanted to be my mentor.
Right.
And through that process, I was rolling out of the Harvard bookstore one day, and I saw a book called Spiritual Evolution by Dr. George Vaillant. And George Vaillant, he's considered the godfather of positive psychology. And he was a psychiatrist or psychoanalyst for about 50 years, and also the longest term director of the Harvard study of adult adaptation, which is the longest study of human happiness. It's been going since something like 1938, something like that. Right? And so I cold emailed him when I got home. And what was amazing was he emailed me back about an hour later. And I was so nervous, I had to go lie down for a while before I could respond.
Totally.
And he was amazing. He's like, yeah, that sounds great. I'd love to talk about it. Come on over for tea.
Oh my God.
Yes. And he ended up being my advisor for the rest of my time at Harvard. Mm-hmm.
That is so legendary.
He was amazing. Is amazing.
Wow. What can I say about that? That is so, I mean, you and I were talking about the hero's journey, and just like, it feels so mythic. You stumble upon this tome written by somebody, you know, who's going to be your Yoda, your Obi-Wan Kenobi, whatever you want to call it. Oh my gosh, that is so great. And just to go back to Thich Nhat Hanh, I mean, only recently did I learn about just how much hell this man has been through in his life. So if anybody could say that, good.
Absolutely. Say it and mean it.
Yeah, like just wow. Just so many elements of your story. The personification of resilience and your capacity to impart it in such usable language is one of your great gifts. And I know that the people who come to see you, I know that you benefit from it. I know that everyone around you benefits. By the way, just one of the funny little artifacts in the study of the 3 Good Things exercise is that the people around the people who do the 3 Good Things exercise also show greater signs of happiness based on that satisfaction with life scale without even having done the intervention, just by virtue of being around. So my final question for now is, if you had the magical powers to confer upon all humanity one insight or skill that would dramatically improve the lives of individuals, and since we're all connected, the people around that individual, what would that insight or skill be? And how do you imagine it would improve the lives of the individual and the collective around?
I think that the realization, to go back to the Thich Nhat Hanh quote, no mud, no lotus, I would confer the awareness that that is absolutely true, so that so much preliminary pain isn't experienced when hard things happen. Because I think so much pain is generated in the adjustment phase, right? As we're expanding our emotional repertoire, as we're grieving, which I think is very healthy. But I think there is also a lot of unnecessary suffering that comes from not having the awareness that even the painful things that happen in life are beautiful.
Jen, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with me, my listeners, and by extension, with the world, because you are having your impact on so many people. And as a researcher, as a clinician, as a human being, as a friend, as a person who knows how to play as well as work, I'm just so grateful to you.
Grateful is the word that captures it for me too, Adam. Knowing you has been such a gift, is such a gift.
This is Dr. Adam Dorsay, thanking you for listening to SuperPsyched. If you know anyone who might like it or who might benefit from listening, share it. And if you like the episode, please hit subscribe